Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this Tuesday morning. I'm Kelly Swain. I'm very honored to be your 2021 president here at SAR. We've got a really informative topic and a great speaker ahead for you today. But before we do that, I would like to invite our own Rossana Garcia to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Rossana is a longtime member serving on our board of directors, and she was just installed as the 59th president of the Women's Council of Realtors of California, exactly 40 years after her mother, Eva Garcia. If those of you who are joining us this morning are able to do so, please do stand. And Rossana, take it away.
Thank you, Kelly, and good morning, my fellow SAR members, Sacramento Association of Realtors. Thank you for being with us. If you will, please place your hand over your heart and stand if you are able, and please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Rossana. We appreciate you leading us this morning. And frankly, every day out there.
Thank you.
Before we move forward with our program, I do want to take just a minute to honor somebody who is very special to us at the Sacramento Association of Realtors. As many of you know, past president Patty Gillette passed last month. So I would like to ask that everybody please take a moment of silence to honor her memory. Thank you, everybody. We'll miss you, Patty. Also, if you hadn't seen or if you're not a member of our text alerts, we did have a spam email go out this morning that looks like it's coming from one of your leaders here at SAR and the executive committee. So if you do get that spam email, please don't open it. We did not send that out this morning. And finally, on to our wonderful speaker here this morning. Bruce Aydt is a realtor, attorney, and he's an educator from St. Louis, Missouri. He's a second-generation realtor. I hear you, Bruce, third generation here. He grew up in the real estate business and has worked in virtually every aspect of real estate business. Bruce has been in management as well as in-house legal counsel to companies for over 30 years. He's been involved in realtor association work throughout his career. He served in leadership roles as president of both Missouri Realtors and the St. Louis Realtors. He's been part of the National Association's enlarged leadership team 3 times, has chaired the NAR Pro Standards Committee, Legal Action Committee, and State Leadership Forum, and he's received the National Association's Distinguished Service Award. He's nationally recognized as an educator on real estate and association leadership issues, and is one of the 3 co-trainers for the NAR Mediation Training Seminar. He lives in St. Louis, Missouri with his wife, Lisa, and has 2 grown children and 3 fabulous grandchildren. One's 6 months old. Is that right, Bruce?
Yep.
Yep. He did put together about a 20-25-minute presentation for us this morning. If you have questions as Bruce is going through his presentation, please be sure to use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will definitely have some time for questions and answers after his presentation. Again, Bruce, thank you so much for being here with us this morning, and please take it away.
You bet. Thank you very much, Kelly. Appreciate it. And appreciate Dave contacting me. Dave and I have known each other for a while. We were both involved in professional standards for several years too. So thank you very much for inviting me. And you can tell I maybe had a little something to do with that bio because of my 3 fabulous grandchildren. And I'm pretty sure that everybody's grandchildren are fabulous. Okay. So I acknowledge that. Yeah, so I've got my youngest is 6 months old, and he was born last August, and he is the bright spot in the pandemic for us. He really is. So he was born 6 weeks premature, and he's doing great now. So we are so blessed and grateful to have him in our lives. So let me give you a little bit of background about how we got to where we did with these changes to Article 10 of the code. The primary focus we're going to use today is to look at Standard of Practice 10-5, which is the new standard of practice related to harassing speech hate speech, epithets, and slurs based upon the protected classes. And we're going to give you that and the surrounding materials that we adopted for that standard of practice. But to give you a little context in terms of how we got to where we are today, NAR has for many years received reports through local associations, state associations, through members, and directly to NAR about harassing speech, hate speech, epithets, and slurs based upon the protected classes. And last year, right around the time of the killing of George Floyd, the occurrence of these, or at least the reporting of them, I'll put it that way, increased exponentially. And I think if nothing else, it's because these kinds of discriminatory and hate speech are now able to be recorded, whether by screenshots, whether by video, or whatever the method. And while the primary focus was on reports that we'd received about social media posts, it wasn't just social media posts. For example, you may remember last year, I don't remember exactly which month it was, but the report of the Realtor I believe it was in Arizona, where there were two Black men walking through his neighborhood, and he approached them, the Realtor approached them and asked what they were doing there. They just explained they were browsing the neighborhood and, might possibly be looking for a place to have a business. And he, on many occasions, said, well, this is a no end zone, and used the term. And it was recorded on video and posted in many different places. You might have seen that, in news publications. Point being is that not everything was related to social media context. These are live contexts as well. So the NAR leadership last year, of course, you all know Vince Malta was the president of NAR last year. The NAR leadership team asked the leadership of the Professional Standards Committee to look at these issues about hate speech, harassing speech, epithets, and slurs based upon the protected classes, and to make recommendations about whether or not those things were related to the code, not related to the code, whether they could be involved in some way in the related to being enforced within the Code of Ethics. So we held a special meeting of the NAR Professional Standards Committee last June, I believe it was June 29th. And if you're not familiar, the NAR Professional Standards Committee is over 100 people, representatives from every state, several states obviously with multiple representatives. So for example, among other California realtors, my good friend Ted Loring from Eureka is a member of the Professional Standards Committee and was involved in this as well. In any event, what the result of the full Professional Standards Committee meeting was in June was to recommend that this be referred to the smaller group of the Professional Standards Committee called the Interpretations and Procedures Advisory Board. And the Interpretations and Procedures Advisory Board is a group of about 15 or 20 members of the full Professional Standards Committee. And what our job is to make proposals, if any, to the full committee for their consideration and potential adoption. So the advisory board met 5 times last year during the summer. We made recommendations in the form of a package of several different recommendations. Those were submitted to the full Professional Standards Committee again in October. So on October 5th, the full committee had an additional meeting and largely approved that package of recommendations with just a few changes in them from what the original recommendations were. So essentially, there was a package then of recommendations available. They were to be presented to the NAR Board of Directors on November the 13th. So between that date of October 5th and November the 13th, there was a significant amount of discussion, input, feedback, primarily via the hub on NAR's website, both on the Board of Directors community and on the general forum. In addition to that, it was presented to the legal seminar in mid-October of last year, and that is comprised of over 200 attorneys from associations or counsel to associations all across the country. So some with multiple associations. So clearly we know it reached more than 200 local associations and state associations as well. So I guess my point of bringing this all through is that this is not some simple, quick put together, knee-jerk kind of reaction about anything. It has been fully discussed, I would say vetted, and I'll tell you more about that in just a minute, and has had a significant amount of discussion among the directors and the membership. The Board of Directors met on November 13th, and the directors meeting was supposed to last 2 hours, and this part of the directors meeting lasted about 1 hour and 45 minutes. So the directors meeting was obviously a little bit extended, but my point is there was a really significant amount of discussion at the directors meeting as well. And so in addition to that, of course, these recommendations were all approved by both the staff council for the Professional Standards Committee, the general counsel of the National Association, Katie Johnson, as well as our outside counsel. So we believe that these recommendations have been well thought out, as well as targeted to the very specific things we're looking at that we're going to talk about here in just a minute, and have had a really full discussion and vetting. Not that they're perfect. We are working on continued enhancements and explanations as we speak through this year's Professional Standards Committee. But in the main, the basic recommendations of the standard of practice and the explanatory materials to that are definitely not, they are not going to be changed in any significant way. And we know that they are well within the right track. So let's go ahead and talk specifically about what that new standard of practice is and how to look at it and interpret it. So we talk about the new standard of practice 10-5 and the new standard of practice 10-5 under Article 10, of course. And Article 10, of course, is our anti-discrimination article. Talks about realtors must not use harassing speech, hate speech, epithets, or slurs based on race, color, religion, sex, handicap, familial status, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. I'll call those the protected classes or the protected characteristics within the NAR Code of Ethics. So one of the things I want to point out just to start with is that when this was first being discussed, there was kind of unfortunately a broad statement made that we had a new standard of practice being proposed about, quote, offensive speech. And that got taken to the point that the term offensive speech, people believe that that was just like anything that offended anybody. And you can see from the standard that that is just not true. And I'll be returning to this idea several times during the first part of this presentation. So notice it's very specific types of speech that are involved. It's not just anything that anybody simply thinks is offensive. So we're not talking about what I would call something that a person believes is subjectively offensive to them. We're talking about some very specific things that I would say would have to be proven, and I call it objectively, to a hearing panel. And the standard would be that it would have to be proven to be this type of speech based upon the protected classes by clear, strong, and convincing proof. So let's look in more detail at what those specific types of speech are. It's really a two-step analysis. First, is the speech harassing speech, hate speech, epithets, or slurs? If it is not one of those things, regardless of the topic, if it's not one of those things, then it does not fall under Standard of Practice 10-5. If it is harassing speech, hate speech, epithets, or slurs, is it based upon the protected classes that we talked about, that you see on the screen here and that we talked about just a minute ago, whether it be race, color, religion, sex, handicap, etc. So those protected classes or protected characteristics are the focus of this. So some of the questions we've had is, well, gee whiz, what about political affiliations? What about if I say something about your political candidate that is critical of your political candidate that you don't like and that you're offended by? Well, that's not going to fall under this standard unless it goes further and talks about that in terms of one of the protected classes. So we'll talk about that a little bit more and give a little bit more examples of that here in just a second. So two-step analysis. Is the speech harassing speech, hate speech, epithets, or slurs? And is it based upon one of the protected classes or characteristics in Article 10 of the Code? So the next thing we want to mention is that this standard is not retroactive. So it went into effect on November 13, 2020 and applies only to conduct occurring after November 13, 2020. So if somebody posted hate speech under the protected classes in mid-October last year, you cannot file a complaint against them now based upon that speech that occurred in October, because Standard of Practice 10-5 just didn't exist at the time. All of the other motions have gone into effect generally on January 1st. So everything that we're talking about today is in effect as of today. The next part is to talk more about those terms, harassing speech, hate speech, epithets, and slurs, and how they connect to the protected classes and how they are to be interpreted. And for that, what we look to is a piece that the NAR Professional Standards Committee wrote called an appendix. Now, it's not at all uncommon that the Professional Standards Committee will write to put into the Code of Ethics and Arbitration Manual. So you will see a visual of the first page of this appendix. In addition to that, you'll get copies of this. If you like, these can be available to you, the copies of this slide presentation, so you'll be able to see it in more detail. But point being is that the Code of Ethics and Arbitration Manual includes several what we call appendices. And it relates to appendices related to ethics hearings as well as appendices related to arbitration issues. And we're not very creative about how we title these things. So this one happens to be Appendix 12 to Part 4. Part 4 is the ethics part of the manual. Appendix 12 is literally the 12th appendix. And I would liken this to another appendix that we have, just to analogize and help you understand what these appendices are. And that's under Article 2 of the Code. And you may be familiar with the fact that Article 2 of the Code talks about engaging in exaggeration, misrepresentation, or concealment of pertinent facts about the property or the transaction. And that term pertinent facts at one point was questioned about, well, what does that mean? What is a pertinent fact? Well, to assist in the interpretation of that, the NAR Professional Standards Committee wrote an appendix, happens to be Appendix 2 to Part 4. So you'll see we've gotten all the way up to Appendix 12 now, and it goes into the appropriate interpretation and explanation of what that term pertinent facts means. I mention all that to just say this is an analogy to similar things that we've done in Appendix 12 to Part 4, which is labeled the appropriate interpretation of standard of practice 10-5 and an accompanying policy statement 29 that we'll touch on as well. So within this appendix is further guidance and explanation about what those terms harassing speech, hate speech, epithets, and slurs mean, and discusses it in terms of the protected classes. So let's take a look at some of those terms as in the appendix. So for example, for the term harassing speech, we look to the NAR Code of Conduct and Anti-Harassment Policy. Now, granted, that's not exactly the same as the term harassing speech, but by analogy, it helps to really give a lot of context to what that term harassing speech may mean. So some examples in the appendix based upon that Code of Conduct and Anti-Harassment Policy are that examples of harassment include, look at the first phrase, epithets, slurs, or negative stereotyping. Well, there you go. There's the words in the standard of practice. Drop down a line, denigrating jokes, and the display or circulation of written or graphic material which denigrates or shows hostility towards an individual or group based upon a protected characteristic, which then also connects to the protected classes in Article 10. So that's a definition, if you will, or explanation, an analogy to what harassing speech is. We go on to talk about hate speech, and we look at some dictionary definitions for the terms hate speech, epithets, and slurs. So a dictionary definition for hate speech is speech that's intended to insult, offend, or intimidate a person because of some trait, again, based upon one of the protected classes. So let me pause on this slide for just a minute and talk a little further about the approach to standard of practice 10-5 with the definition of hate speech here. Notice in the context of hate speech, it's speech that's intended to insult, offend, or intimidate a person because of their race, their color, their religion, etc. So part of the analysis that professional standards committees will be looking at is they will be looking at whether in hate speech, what the context of it is and what was the intention. So was it intended to insult, offend, or intimidate? What is the context of the speech? So for example, when I gave you that story about the realtor in Arizona using the N-word, that might be considered hate speech or offensive to somebody. Or if I gave you other examples of from social media posts that we have in fact been given to the Professional Standards Committee, my use of those is not hate speech because I'm using it in the context of an example and for educational purposes so you can understand the kinds of things we're talking about. So the important part here is that hate speech, as well as the other types, harassing speech, epithets, and slurs, context will matter. So what the context is and how the speech was used is going to be part of the analysis that the professional standards hearing panel will use. And again, I go back to this idea that remember too, that it's not what somebody merely subjectively is offended by. Oh, gee whiz, I'm offended that you didn't like my hair color. I'm offended that you thought my clothes were appropriate or inappropriate, or that you didn't like the way I, the type of car I drive. Well, those are unlikely to be anything falling under standard of practice 10-5 unless it's also coupled with some kind of negative stereotype or it's coupled with some kind of further statements based upon one of the protected classes. So the other part in connection with this idea that it's not what is subjectively offensive, it's what the hearing panel is going to see. Is this part of those explanations for hate speech, harassing speech, epithets, and slurs? And is it based upon the protected classes? And they will take into account things like context. Let's talk about those other two terms, epithet and slur. So epithet, I'll use that second phrase, a disparaging or abusive word or phrase. Likewise, with a slur, I'll talk about the second phrase, a shaming or degrading effect, a stain or stigma. So there's a significant amount of guidance in this appendix about the application of those words and their connection to the protected classes under Article 10. So we've heard a lot of things about, gee whiz, well, what about my rights of free speech? And aren't you infringing upon my rights of free speech? So I always like to try to spend just a moment talking about this concept of free speech in this context of Standard of Practice 10-5. And for that, I look to where the origin of the idea of freedom of speech comes from, and that comes from the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, and by extension to the state and local governments under the 14th Amendment to the Constitution. So what the First Amendment says is it says Congress shall make no law. So let me emphasize that. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, along with several other rights. So within the First Amendment is the right to freedom of religion, the right to be free from the establishment of a religion, the right to petition the government, the right to assembly, the right to freedom of the press. So all those rights are all contained in the First Amendment. For our purposes, we talk about the idea that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. That also then, as I said, gets extended to the state and local governments through the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Now, notice also that people talk about I have the right to say whatever I want to. Not exactly true. Even the government can restrict free speech in certain circumstances. So there's a very old case from 1919 in which Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said to this effect, and I'm paraphrasing, gee, you can't shout fire in a crowded theater when there's no fire. So that's a limitation on the right of free speech. Likewise, hate speech, speech inciting violence, hate speech alone is within the First Amendment, but hate speech connected to violent actions are in fact limited under the First Amendment. So there are definitely limitations, and the First Amendment is not completely open in terms of even the government regulation of that. On the other hand, when you look at it, again, I take us back to the idea that Congress shall make no law, extension to the state and local governments. In other words, First Amendment relates to governmental entities restricting free speech. NAR is not a governmental entity, nor is any private company. So NAR is a private organization, just like your companies are private individual companies. So you are not bound by, and neither is NAR, not bound by nor constrained by the First Amendment. And we can have a rule such as in Standard of Practice 10-5. So that is hopefully some guidance about the idea of what the free speech issue is all about. There is a parallel policy that was also adopted, and this has had some misunderstandings as well, so I'm including it today. And the misunderstanding is that the change in this policy somehow now makes the Code of Ethics applicable in every single article of the code to all of our activities. Well, yes, that's what the policy was changed to, but no, it doesn't apply to every article of the code, simply because by the terms of the articles of the code, they are limited to real estate activities and transactions. So let me walk through it real quickly for you here. It used to talk about while realtors are encouraged to follow the principles of the code, a realtor shall be subject to disciplinary action only related to real estate activities and transactions. Well, in order for us to have a standard like Standard of Practice 10-5, this policy needed to be changed, and it now reads, a realtor shall be subject to disciplinary action under the Code of Ethics with respect to all of their activities. Now, please understand that, again, first of all, nobody can violate this policy. So the policy is simply setting the parameters for what the code can cover. But again, you have to look at the specific terms of the articles and the standards of practice of the code in order to determine whether or not it covers only real estate activities and transactions or goes beyond that. So when I look at that, what I can tell you is I can tell you that the all of the articles of the code and all of the standards of practice, with one exception that I can possibly talk about, relate to real estate activities and transactions. The only possible exception is Article 15, and Article 15 talks about not knowingly making false or misleading statements about other real estate professionals, but then it goes on to say their businesses or business practices. So I would argue that those things actually go together with business and business practices. So bottom line, the only standard of practice that applies outside of our real estate activities and transactions is this new standard of practice 10-5. We looked at this very, very specifically, and we looked at it in detail and decided that this, in fact, was very important to do, even for social media posts, activities that are not specifically related to a real estate transaction, because connected to another part of the preamble to the code, we adopted this standard to eliminate practices which might damage the public or bring discredit or dishonor to the real estate profession. Last pieces I have there on the screen, but you'll also see in the handout a link to all of the resources on NAR's website about this. I know that's a long link, so all you have to do is log on to NAR.Realtor, search for Code of Ethics and Professional Standards Policies. You will get a very robust page related to materials and information, including various videos related to these changes and the adoption of Standard of Practice 10-5. There's also a link to the webinars that we have produced to this date, as well as new webinars that we will have for 2 more months in the future. So we are, we've done 4 of them. They are recorded and available for you. In addition to that, we'll be having another one on March 9th, and then on April 6th will be the final one that we'll be doing. I see that Aaron has put into the chat box the reference to the appendix. In addition to that, let's check the Q&A and see what kinds of Q&A possibilities you have. So question from Paula, do you see any possibility of discussion about amending 10-5 to include protected classes California includes but are not part of 10-5? Actually, I would say no, that's not going to happen. And the reason that's not going to happen is that, pardon me, I'm being too strong. The likelihood is that it's not going to happen. We don't typically go state by state, nor will we say whatever is the state classes will also be included in any part of the Code of Ethics. We do that to try to keep the Code of Ethics uniform across the country. That's not to say there may not be some of the classes in California or Illinois or New York or any other state that may end up being adopted into Article 10 of the code in the future. So for example, as you know, the Fair Housing Law does not specifically cover sexual orientation or gender identity, even though they have, there are some connections to that that HUD is now looking at. bottom line, NAR went ahead and put that in Article 10 of the Code of Ethics. Starting in 2011, I think we added sexual orientation in 2011. In 2014, I believe it was, we included gender identity. So yes, they may be included, but they would be included on a class by class basis, and we would not be going into, well, whatever the state law is will be included in 10-5. So sorry if that's a long answer. Hopefully that covers it. What other questions do you have?
I don't see any coming in just yet, Bruce, but to our audience, Bruce is a nationally recognized educator, instructor, speaker, and it's, we brought him to you this morning because it's important for us all to understand the code of ethics that we all abide by every single day in order to use that trademark name Realtor. And this was a really big change for us, and a much discussed one, as I'm sure Bruce is painfully aware, but that's why we wanted to bring him to you this morning to make sure you understood the full extent and the interpretation of this change to our code of ethics. So he's a great resource for us. If you happen to have any more questions for him, he'll be with us just another minute or two. So please do use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Bruce, looking forward, are there other types of modifications that are being discussed potentially for this section of the code of ethics?
Hang on one second. I posted a link, but it's the wrong link. So I'm trying to please ignore my last link that I just posted. I apologize for that. I do not know why that happened. And apparently I can't get rid of it. Kelly, I was trying to post a link to the NAR resources, and that did not work. So let me try it one more time, see if I can get that done, and then I'll be happy to answer your question.
No problem, Bruce. We all we're allowed a little bit of human error from time to time.
All right, that's the correct link. I apologize.
There we go. Go ahead.
All right, so question in the chat box. Not often I get a question like, what kind of people or what type of people live in that neighborhood? I have my own way of answering, and not everyone's prepared for these types of questions. What does NAR suggest is the best way to answer these questions? Well, I don't know if I could represent anything on behalf of NAR, but I've done a lot of research on this area. I do fair housing training, and so my answer is always that you would be best to refer them to a public source, that we do not keep those kinds of records. And basically that you probably most likely have no knowledge of any of the makeup of a neighborhood based upon whether it be ethnic characteristics or racial characteristics or anything of that nature. So the best way to do it would be to refer them to a public source. And probably the most authoritative public source in areas like this is the Census Department. So you talk about census.gov. And that's an official government website that's going to give them a lot of information about whatever neighborhood they're interested in. And then they can do whatever research they like and then specify any preferences that they may have based upon their own research. So hopefully that helps with that. So Kelly, go ahead. I'm sorry, your question.
No problem. I just was wondering, Bruce, are there other, changes or modifications? Are there conversations happening around things that might be coming down the road to our code of ethics or other changes that might be made?
So right now we're continuing to do the heavy lift on standard of practice 10-5. But what that means is, for example, we are looking at and in the process of drafting and adopting various different case interpretations, which will help with specific situations about 10-5. So one of the questions we've had a lot about is about, well, what about this political affiliation issue? Gee whiz, what about these realtors who were involved in the Capitol riots? Is being involved in that Capitol riot, is that alone a violation of standard of practice 10-5? And the answer basically is no. So person who has been widely publicized is this realtor from Texas. Well, is she in violation of the code? She did, in fact, according to the video, that's been shown. She apparently and allegedly entered the Capitol and did it illegally. She's been charged with that. Whether or not she's guilty, who knows? But point is that that activity alone does not fall under Standard of Practice 10-5 because it was an alleged criminal activity, and it related to the initial impetus related to a political issue, which then turned into something else. Now, if she'd gone further and perhaps had carried a sign that had an ethnic or a racial slur on it, or she had taken spray paint and sprayed graffiti on the walls of the Capitol, which were slurs based upon, any of the protected classes, then that conduct would fall under Standard of Practice 10-5. So that's kind of where we're headed right now, is we're working on case interpretations and further enhancements to explain 10-5.
I'm quite sure those are muddy waters to help clear up. So thank you, Bruce, for all of your work on those to help make realtors really truly stand out as the professionals and the supporters of our country that we need to be. So thank you so much. I don't see any other questions coming through here. Any final words for us, Bruce?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to explain this. We're trying to get the word out to as many groups as we can. And it's great to know that there are over 100 people on the call today. And so I've reached 100 more people, hopefully.
Well, we really appreciate your time, Bruce, and your expertise and you sharing your information with us. It's critical that we understand that code of ethics. So thank you for the clarity and for being here. And hopefully you get to go spend more time with those grandkids real soon.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks again, everybody. We appreciate you, listening to what Bruce had to say. As you can see, he's truly an expert on the subject. So we appreciate you listening to the presentation this morning. We do have a few important announcements we want to make sure that you are aware of. If you hadn't heard yet, the 2022 Officer and Director Petition Candidate applications are now available on our SAR website. Those are due by April 16th. You can access the applications as well as required qualifications on our website. You can see the link there on the slide deck, sacrealtor.org/2022 nominee, or you can contact Lindsay Harank at SAR if you have any questions from her. So if you know anyone who might be great serving on our board of directors or who you want to see step up into leadership, give them a call, send them the link. We want to see more people involved. We do have a few really great classes coming up with our education department. So we do start our 5-session Broker Training Institute or BTI series. That will begin on Friday, March the 26th. If you are a new broker, an aspiring broker, or maybe you just want to brush up on what's going on for the latest and greatest, this is the right series for you. So it does take place over 5 consecutive Fridays, and it will help you learn what it takes to be a successful broker. As you all, I'm sure, are acutely aware, property management is a really challenging arena these days. So for those of you who are interested in the current state of property management, don't miss our update on Friday, March the 12th from the extraordinary Chris Arola. Learn how the pandemic has affected our industry, along with 2021 new laws and regulations. And then last but certainly not least, we have a brand new class that we're offering for you here at SAR. It's being taught by our own CEO, Dave Tanner, and it's called Race in Real Estate, How We Got Here. Mark your calendars for Thursday, March the 18th. This is the very first time we're presenting this class to you, and we certainly highly recommend that you consider attending. You can find all of these and other live webinars at the SAR portal, which is education.sacrealtor.org. And we also have on-demand webinars available for you there as well. So don't forget to check them out. Scholarship. So this is our time of the year where we're raising money for scholarship. We have an awesome video from the scholarship committee member, Frank Sino, to talk to you about our upcoming Shamrock Shuffle Fun Run.
Hey everybody, Frank Sino from SAR's Scholarship Committee. Hey, today's the day. Now's the time. This week is the week to get signed up for the Shamrock Shuffle virtual run. Hey, it's real easy to do. It's not really a run. It's a run, walk, whatever distance that you want to do. The real point is sign up, go to our Eventbrite site, pay $35, and you're going to get an awesome custom Shamrock Shuffle shirt for that $35 entry fee. That entry fee is also going to put you into a drawing for a $500 cash prize. Pretty cool. Along with the shirt, we've got a swag bag filled with all kinds of goodies from our sponsors. And because of our sponsors, your money is all going to go to the deserving kids that are college bound. So all the proceeds are going to the scholarships, and $35 is a great cause. We need your support. We'd love your support. Thank you so much.
And I will challenge each of you to get out there. I'm going to challenge myself to complete a half marathon. I hope you all will too. Trust me, I'll be walking, not running. But hey, let's get out there. Let's enjoy this weather and let's raise money for those really well-deserving seniors. We've all had a lot of fun over the years competing for last member standing. We did begin that program, get your spot, or even better, multiple spots, just $25 each. You can purchase those at sacrealtor.org/last member for your chance at the $1,000 prize if you are our last member standing when we do the drawing at our June main meeting. Do you know a high school senior headed for college? The SAR scholarship application is open now through the end of this month, March 31st at 4:30 p.m. All applicants do need a minimum 3.7 GPA. They need to be a resident of Sacramento or West Sac counties, unless they're a friend or a relative of an SAR member, in which case they just need to prove residency in the state. That GPA requirement does apply regardless. You can contact Madison at SAR for more information. All right, we have our very own chair of the Affiliate and Finance Forum on for you this morning. He's going to give us all a most important rate update, and nothing going on there in the world of rates, right, Leo? I mean, I've heard it's just been super boring, nothing going on. Is that right?
It's super boring. We've only had 5 notifications this morning on price changing. So it's definitely volatile in the market right now. So for those of you that have clients out there that were quoted rates a couple of weeks ago and that are shopping, we know it's difficult. Make sure you're going back to your loan officers and getting them pre-qualified. With the jump in rates, it could be any much as a quarter, 3/8, some programs as much as 5/8. That your borrower is still qualified. With the increase in rates, it's definitely decreasing their purchasability, and we know it's super aggressive and competitive out there. So make sure you're doing that. On a positive note, we have seen a lot of the COVID overlays starting to strip back from investors. So we've had additional guidelines that we've had to do, and that's starting to strip back a little bit. So we have seen some leniency in underwriting guidelines over the past 30 to 45 days. I'm hearing rumblings out there that new jumbo investors are coming to market, so that's exciting. And the one thing that I will leave you with is remember, on your self-employed borrowers, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, and VA do require additional requirements. So if your borrowers have been affected by any sort of COVID and their income has decreased, even though their overall income is there, that they might not be able to qualify because of they're not having revenue coming in, and we're requiring P&Ls now that are going to be up to date. So make sure you're going back, checking with your loan officers. Everybody's trying to get into contract. It's super competitive out there. And if you've got folks that are out there for 3, 4, 5 weeks trying to get offers accepted, things are changing, rates are obviously volatile. Hopefully they'll settle back down. They're still amazing. I mean, I've been doing this 27 years and never thought I would sell rates in the 2s, let alone thought, anything under 3%. So we're blessed on where we are. So make sure you're checking with your realtors. And then this Thursday, stop into the Finance Affiliate Forum for our speaker. Our speaker is Richard Smith. He's going to be talking about virtual assistants and how they can help take your business to the next level. So any questions on interest rates and what's going on in the market?
If you have a question for Leo, please take advantage of the Q&A or the chat. I know he'll be sticking around to the end of the meeting for you. Leo, thank you so much for your leadership with the Affiliate and Finance Forum this year. You're doing a great job. We really appreciate you, and thank you so much for the update this morning. If we see a question come in, we'll make sure we get back to you.
Awesome.
Cool. All right, so moving on, just a couple more announcements for everybody we think it's important for you to know about. We all are sad to miss out on our crab feed that we've done every year, but the Cantry Committee's been hard at work finding a COVID acceptable substitute. So, hey, have you got on that website and ordered your seafood boil bucket yet? I know I have. Just $99 will get you and your friend a feast of snow crab and shrimp and dewy sausage, red potatoes, corn on the cob. It'll get you some fresh bread and green salad. It will be available if you want just a single serving size for just $55. You can visit cantreeboil.eventbrite.com, place your order, show up at the SAR parking lot Friday, March the 19th, anytime between 3 and 6 p.m., and then go enjoy your seafood boil while you're watching some March Madness. The catering is going to be provided by our talented and very impactful Salvation Army Culinary Arts Training Program. And all of those proceeds are going right back to our own community, Salvation Army. So make sure you're supporting that event. Should be delicious and lots of fun. We also wanted to thank all of our volunteers. Our SAR members filled purses with more than love even. So we had more than 20 of our members attend our recent purse stuffing event on Saturday, February the 20th. They helped sort and stuff purses for Julie's Purse Project. They're a local nonprofit organization, and they fill purses with essential items for those in need. They then distribute those out to our Sacramento communities. Throughout the months of November and December, our SAR members, donated over 225 purses. That's astounding, you guys. Thank you so much. We filled over 1,000 purses in the end for that charity, and they were sorted and filled, ready for distribution. Our SAR Volunteer Coordinating Committee wants to say thank you to everybody out there who donated purses, and for those who attended the event and safely practiced our social distancing while filling purses. You guys are astounding. Thank you so much. We do want to thank you all for attending our main meeting this morning. We hope you found it informative. We're trying to keep you all up to date. It's really important that you put the next main meeting on your calendar now. Because of the contract we have with our speaker for April, we cannot record that session for you to watch later. So please make sure you're attending live. It will be your only opportunity to hear about fair housing with Dr. Tricia Rose. She's a national speaker. So put that into your calendar again, Tuesday, April the 6th at 9 a.m. And as always, please watch Facebook and our website so we can keep you updated on everything going on SAR. I want to thank the staff on this call. I want to thank Aaron Stump for your quick fingers with the links in the chat. To our leadership, to Rosanna, Leo, thank you for joining us this morning. Thanks to all of you for attending, making the time. Go out there and shine your light. We'll see you in April.